Good morning, all. This Wednesday, March 2nd. Thank you so much for joining me here on our Real Talk live streaming series, episode number 2. I'm super excited about our topic and guests today. Certainly, new construction is an issue that the industry is facing, and we all know the topic of the undersupply or shortage of inventory. And so we'll get some great insights today. And it is no mystery that one of the contributing factors fueling the real estate market the last 20 to 24 months is the undersupply of homes. And we all know that the two sources of supply are one, resale of existing homes. And last year was the second best year in terms of since 2006. And the second is newly built homes. And we've got some great guests to enlighten us around new construction development today. As a follow-up on what Lawrence Young shared with us last month, as well as a year ago, a contributing factor to that shortage really is the underdevelopment and under construction of 13 consecutive years. And so here we are playing catch up. And again, I'm super excited for the conversation today with our two guests who really have a pulse of the new construction sector. So with that, let's welcome Dave Nielsen, CEO of the Home Builders Association of Metro Portland, and Ryan Makinster, Director of Policy and Government Affairs. Gentlemen, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Jason.
Hey, thanks for being with us here this morning. Super excited for both of you and the conversation with you today. I figured where we would start is really just kind of a broad perspective. You both know that our company operates in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, and Washington, and throughout both states. And we'd love to just get your perspective around what you're seeing, the challenges and opportunities here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jason. And I'll kind of kick things off. I've got maybe more of a little bit of a global perspective on some things, and then Ryan is really in the day-to-day working with a lot of our members around the region, and so can provide some insight as well too. But the biggest thing, I guess, just as starting off, and in fact, one of the organizations that we do a lot of partnerships with is the Portland Business Alliance, so the Greater Portland Area's Chamber of Commerce, and they're also connected with some of the Seattle area chambers of commerce as well too. So there's a lot of collaboration there. But they just released an economic analysis, and it basically showed where are the Seattle and Portland markets compared to some of their peer regions across the country. And just for those of you that are listening, peer regions, for this sake, are considered to be cities like Indianapolis, Austin, Salt Lake City. There's a couple others in there as well too. I think Minneapolis, St. Paul is also considered there. They have usually kind of similar politics, similar demographics, similar housing markets. Seattle and Portland lag behind all of those peer markets in terms of job recovery, downtown traffic. For example, the downtown visitor traffic, just visitor traffic, tourist traffic to both Seattle and Portland is still down about 30 to 40% from what it was pre-COVID. Employee traffic is even further down. It's about 65 to 70% down in both of those metropolitan areas, as companies still haven't had their employees come back. So, and the vacancy on the commercial industrial properties in downtown areas, both Seattle and Portland, lags behind all those markets. So some really big headwinds that have been facing the Seattle and Portland region in terms of our job recovery, foot traffic down in our urban core areas, the cleanup of those areas. And they also did some polling research ahead of these elections and found that homelessness and crime are the two biggest issues right now to voters. Far more, jobs isn't even actually much of an issue. Cost of living is still a big issue, but jobs aren't. And usually those two things are tied together. But people understand there's jobs out there. It's just whether it's the jobs that they want. Everyone's kind of going through this big reset. But cost of living is a big concern right now. So those are some of the bigger issues that are affecting the markets generally and the recovery coming out of COVID. And Brian can probably talk a little bit more about some of the specific things that are impacting the housing market as well too.
Thanks, Dave. Ryan, you want to add anything to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we know is obviously with the market coming back and some downturns, we still have a housing crisis in Washington, Oregon, in our metro areas. And that, I mean, it comes down to many factors, but the main factor that's underlying everything, no matter what's happening in the economy, is a lack of supply. That is what's driving this issue. We have approximately 60,000 units short in the Portland metro area today. That's current under production, not to mention what's going forward. And I don't have those numbers for Seattle. Us in Washington, they're not required to do a housing needs analysis, which we are required by law here to do in Oregon. But when you're looking at Washington and houses in the Seattle market, for example, which I'm sure, people on this watching this would probably recognize this, are selling for $150,000 to $200,000 over asking price. That's not a natural market. There's not an equilibrium in supply and demand there, or you're never equal, but it's usually dance around that for whichever side it leans, whether it's the buyer or the seller. So that is one of our biggest issues, is a constrained supply in both the Washington and Oregon markets. In addition, we have a few other things. Workforce is a factor. Prior to the crisis we're currently in with COVID, our industry has been down since the end of the recession. That took a very large toll on our industry, especially with the skilled trades. A lot of people either chose to get out of the industry due to close to retirement age, or some people chose not to get into it, or they were forced out just due to the fact that a lot of companies were unfortunately had to leave the market. And we did not have a natural pipeline for workforce development, especially for the skilled trades. And that's something we as an organization are trying to build, as well as an industry. Yeah. We were just recently at our International Builders Show in Florida, and that was one of the big issues. And in fact, our national association is working with Boys and Girls Club of America and individual localities to develop a program to get opportunities like this in front of those that could really take advantage of this. And so that was one of the big, strong things, but it is not due to COVID, which some have posited. It has been a problem prior to that, to the tune of probably approximately 40% below what we need coming into the market prior to COVID. So you can imagine what's happened now.
Yeah.
As Dave mentioned, there's a reset happening, and we are very hopeful. And obviously we are participating in this process of allowing and encouraging people to consider the skilled trades as part of that reset. These are high paying jobs that you do not have to incur a large amount of college level education, post-secondary education debt to get into, and you can start learning right away. And so that's one of the big things. The other thing we learned about at IBS, which everybody is aware of, is the lumber issue. Lumber adds a lot of cost. We were to a point in the last 2 years where your lumber package on a $300,000 house went up by $20,000.
Wow.
You can imagine what that does when someone gets pre-qualified when they're at the start of the building process, and to realize halfway through that has to come from either the builder or the owner, which are considerations now. And so that's a big thing. There has been some progress. About 30 to 40% of our softwoods come from Canada. There was a tariff that's been steadily increasing due to federal action, all the way up to 17%. And that was causing problems. Department of Commerce has signaled that they are going to lower that from 18% down to about 11.5%. And we've already started seeing some of those numbers to come down. Unfortunately, our national association, the economists, don't believe we're ever going to be back down to the 400 per 1,000 feet of board feet that we were used to for years. And so It's always going to be elevated, but we expect it to come down in the next 6 months.
Yeah. Well, it was really ironic timing of you joining us today and just coming off that International Builders Show in Orlando. And, I just want to touch on a couple numbers, and I'm going to read these, but there was some positive expectations to close out 2021 and move into 2022. The numbers that I'm showing, permits were up 9.1. This is nationally, but permits were up 9.1% in December over November, and up 6.5% over the same month prior year. So it seemed like we had some good momentum from a permit perspective to close out the year. Now, single family permits increased 6.5% to end the month in January. And single family units, this was what I thought was really interesting. Single family units authorized but not started is up 32.5% from January of last year. And there's 785,000 single family homes under construction, which is 27% higher than a year ago, meaning January of 2021. So it seemed like we closed with some good momentum and then started January strong. What are you sensing from the builder community around just overall activity and opportunity, with obviously supply being the one of the challenges, but what are you sensing and hearing from the builder community relative to how the year ended and how the start of this year's begun?
Yeah, well, I'll start off, I guess. A couple of things. Again, the builder community is really a diverse group. And so if you're talking about maybe the higher end, the custom home builders, the remodelers, there you're seeing some people kind of taking a little bit of a pause because the prices have risen so much. And it's not just on lumber. And those of you that are, I mean, your audience probably is aware of this as well too. I mean, it's almost anything: appliances, windows, I mean, the delays on things, the amount of extra costs that's adding in. And especially if someone is kind of buying a house during the construction process, that becomes a real challenge right now for how the client and the realtor and the builder work through some of these continuing price escalation clauses as a home is being built. But I know that some of maybe the higher end custom home builders and remodelers are pausing a little bit or slowing down, or their clients are kind of putting a little pause on things, waiting for some of these pricing to come down. But when it comes to the production built environment, it is full systems go. I mean, every single one. We've got more builders in the Portland market. I know there's more that keep coming into the Seattle market too. But 10 years ago, we had 2 or 3 national builders. Now we've got 8 to 9, and probably 2 or 3 more they're sniffing in. So there is certainly a strong demand still for the Portland real estate market, and we're seeing that through the influx of national capital, national investors, international investors, and these national builders are coming into our market, and they're going like gangbusters with the limited supply. Those supply figures that you had were national, and unfortunately, that's the challenge we have in Oregon and Washington, particularly in our metropolitan markets, is we're not seeing anywhere near that kind of increase in activity as what some other parts of the country are that don't have the same restrictions on growth and other challenges and impediments right now.
And you, Dave, you're referring to the urban growth boundary and just restrictions around lot availability and the ability to expand, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. And while Oregon and Washington have different ways that they manage their land systems, there's a lot of similarities between them. And so, yes, that's a huge part of what we're talking about. But it's also just impediments in the building process itself. I mean, that's one of the things we're looking at. And while some of this information seems challenging, one of the members, when we shared this with our board last week, said, well, hey, the good news is everyone realizes that there needs to be a change, and maybe that's going to be the impetus for voters to make a change in this year's elections, to get people into office who are going to be more sensitive to some of these issues and kind of help on some of these business issues, because that is the truth of it. Both of our markets have great opportunities, but some significant challenges that we've got to work through. And so we'll see how the elections play out this year, but I think that'll be big for both of our states.
Yeah, and Jason, I could give you a little bit more color around that if you'd like. And
yeah, please.
And the issues, yeah, as Dave mentioned, Washington, Oregon. I previously, from coming on HBI, actually I was in a similar role in Washington, and both of them go by different names, but they do have constrained markets. They do have urban growth boundaries, or whatever you want to call them, that limit where you can grow, and it's driven by a desire to go vertical rather than horizontal. Unfortunately, the market doesn't always want what the elected officials have chosen to, I guess, encourage. And so that's where the problem lies for one of these issues. But we also have a similar issue in both jurisdictions, or both states as well as local. There continues to be added cost pressure from government regulation. We know nationally, which is fairly true here in Washington and Oregon as well, is about 25% of the cost of a house is based on government regulation and fees. So you combine them, right? There's a government take, whether it's fees or taxes or impact fees, or SDCs as we call them, for helping to pay for infrastructure, as well as just the time associated with complying with regulation and permit review, as well as the hard costs of complying with that. And one of those would be energy savings. We are working. We actually have a high performance council that works to come up with ideas to help get us to those a better energy savings and more high performance home building techniques. However, there sometimes seems to be a loss of understanding at the state level or local level about any change to those requirements of more efficient building techniques are going to require longer build times, different materials, and those add costs. We see this in Salem as well as Olympia. Every year there are additional changes of requirements with very positive outlooks. I mean, the outcome intended is a good outcome, and we support that and we want to get there. But part of the conversation always seems to be forgotten is that there's an associated cost. For example, in Washington, the recently passed energy code added about $20,000, anywhere between $8,000 to $20,000 on the average price of a home. The ulterior motives are good, right? We want to get to those things. However, the conversation needs to include how much government regulation or new fees or requirements cost when we are in the middle of a housing cost and supply crisis.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to share that data when we are such, I mean, it's no secret that we have such a shortage of housing, and then for costs like that to continue to go up, which impacts the folks that are delivering the housing, seems to be a bit of a conflict there. What are you two hearing from the builder community with respect to inflation and interest rates, and how are those going to impact their outlook and confidence moving forward through 2022?
Yeah, I would say that there's certainly, I mean, it's been a long time, right? While COVID kind of created a short-term recessionary-like impact on the housing industry in early 20, unlike Washington, we were able to keep construction open here in Oregon for that whole time. Washington was shut down for a month or two, a couple months, I think, in spring of 20. And that had a big impact on that market as well too. But we've basically been able to keep the construction industry open and running, and it's been going well. So yeah, we had kind of a little short-term pandemic recession, if you will, but really we haven't had anything since coming out of the Great Recession in 2011-12, which is when our industry kind of started to really come out of it.
Yeah,
and so we're kind of overdue. I mean, this has been a long time of economic recovery. Again, the pandemic being this anomaly in there. And so what does that mean? And I think there's a lot of our industry, especially on the development side, that are starting to be a little bit cautious about how much they're investing in developing large land projects, and just being cautious about that. But again, the supply is so short that I don't see anyone taking their foot off the pedal to a large degree. Interest rates are going to play a part in that. Material pricing, at some point, with the cost of living going up, housing prices going up, and wages not increasing comparatively, that's going to have to come to a head at some point. But unlike the last Great Recession, which is really caused by a lot of things, but one of the biggest was an oversupply at that time, we absolutely do not have an oversupply. And as Ryan said, we're anticipating not only about 110,000 units short over the next 20 years, are currently short, but that's anticipated to grow to over 200,000 units over the next 20 years. So that is a huge underlying thing, that no matter what interest rates do, jobs and all that, that's going to be some significant upside to the housing market. But certainly the rising interest rates and the higher cost of living are going to have some impacts. And I don't think any of us can really predict what that's going to look like. But those are some of the both positives and negatives that are happening right now.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that crystal ball and just to actually predict it accurately. And this is the one industry that is just so hard to predict, and you just got to focus on the data today and what that kind of means moving forward. And to your point, it's been 10 years, and I've shared this many times here recently. Come the second half of the year, really July 1st, will mark 10 years in recovery, and to be in one real estate cycle for 10 consecutive years with no pivot, no correction, nothing, and probably going to be another year and a half or two. So maybe this real estate cycle's 12, 13 potential years in one kind of appreciating market. It's historic. I mean, it's really an unprecedented course that we're navigating right now. So,
and to your point, there's a reason that economists look forward and they don't usually look back at their previous predictions, because even they have a hard time getting it right. So
yeah. Well, so what do you all see in terms of year over year growth in the Pacific Northwest, just in the new construction sector? Because I'm reading, big gaps in terms of predictions, anything from a pretty modest 1% to 2% year over year growth to, double digit year over year growth. Do you guys have something that you can share with us what you're projecting year-over-year growth for the Pacific Northwest specifically?
Yeah, I don't know if Ryan's got any information on that. We do an annual housing forecast every fall in early November, and we had our national economist come out and share it. I believe that he said that I wanted to say it was somewhere in the 3 to 4% range that he saw the market growing nationally in 22 as compared to 21. So it was kind of a low, modest growth, but still certainly growth. And I don't know if Ryan has any additional information on that. Did you have anything else on that, Ryan, in terms of projections or?
I was going to say, no, we don't track it that granularly on that. I think when we have our national economist, that's where it exists. I will say one thing though, that is causing, I think it's an opportunity for your viewers to know about, but it's also one of the reasons we don't know where it's going. Washington's considered some of these type of legislative actions, but Oregon was in the first in the country with a bill called HB 2001 around middle housing. It's basically allowing for middle housing types, which are duplex, triplex, quadplex, townhouses, and cottage clusters, to be built in any single family zoned area, mostly on cities over 10,000 population, or basically anywhere in a metro area. And there's other jurisdictions doing it. I believe California is doing it exclusively for duplexes in Seattle, or Washington's considering it as well. So we have a lot of builders. There's going to be opportunities for that to develop those lots with more units on them, which sometimes makes it more feasible that they're going to be produced, especially in jurisdictions such as, Portland or a metro area. I think that's going to offer up a lot of opportunities, and it's a window of hope when we're dealing with a land supply crisis. But I know a number of our members, besides some of the production builders, are kind of holding off a little bit and looking till all that ordinances are written and implemented at the local level, which will be the end of June, before they're making some of these decisions. I just got off to come onto this meeting or this podcast, a meeting with a lot of my builders in Portland. And we were discussing specifically the implementation of those laws. And a number of them have told me they are looking at properties, but they're not making any purchase decisions until they want to know what those laws are going to look like, because there's nuance. It's a whole new way of thinking, and they need to understand it before they're willing to take the economic risk in purchasing land underneath this new model. And so I think we're in a little bit of a gray area that is not encompassed in some of those broader numbers that are national, because we're very unique here in the Northwest.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm assuming, though, while there may be a pause in acquiring new property, there's, just looking at the permit numbers and kind of the momentum there's still enough activity to keep things going through at least the first half of the year, and then get to that point in time where there's a better understanding of the impact of those laws and regulations. Is that a fair assessment, Ryan?
I would say that's fair. And I know when you first raised that, the number of permits started or land, I guess, under entitlement. One of the things, and Dave was spot on. I came from Southwest Washington when we were shut down over there due to COVID, and over here you didn't shut down. However, Washington, Oregon, somewhat to California, we, as you guys all know, we are still under tighter restrictions regarding COVID than most states in the country. Subsequently, all of our jurisdictions are still doing stuff virtually, and we have a pretty long permitting review, land use review timeline right now, partially due to the way our laws are set up in Washington and Oregon, but partially due to that new format of work. It has not shaken all the bugs out even within 2 years. And so I think you can see a lot of those original permits, the activity of actual going vertical is going to still be a pretty long time out. We're looking at 3 or 4 or 5 months before we can go vertical on a lot of these projects. And I think that's what you're going to see. So it's good to see all the permits that have been put in for developing these subdivisions, individual lots. However, we still have a conundrum of long permitting delay times just due to people still working from home. If you have a problem, you can't walk in and talk to someone at the counter about a few lines that are wrong on a plot plan.
Yeah, good point. So with respect to a couple of headwinds, predominantly supply chain issues and labor. I mean, how do you expect those to impact production this year with the community of folks that you're speaking with? I mean, those are some of those numbers with respect to the lack of labor is pretty staggering. And then obviously everybody's aware of the supply chain issues. And so how impactful are those two things going to be moving through 2022?
Well, I'll share a couple of things. One is we believe the supply chain issues are going to be here throughout the entire year, and maybe into 23. I mean, and it depends, but you've got major international cargo and shipping delays and overloads on the system in ports across the world. You've got a shortage of trucking drivers right now. And I mean, it's all across the supply chain. It's not just the manufacturing or distribution of the stuff, it's the delivery of it, it's the shipping of it. So that's definitely going to be around for the entire year. And what that means, again, for builders and for those involved in the buying and selling of homes, is trying to figure out how you navigate delays in the construction process, increases in terms of costs. If you've got someone that's under a contract, I mean, those are the things that I think realtors in particular need to really be working with builders if they're working on new construction, working with builders on new construction in terms of working through those issues, because they're going to be there for the next year plus on the supply chain side. And some areas may get a little better than others. But the other thing I wanted to mention as well, too, that we haven't talked about yet, but the whole pandemic is obviously causing a lot of people to rethink not only their job situations, but their living situations and where they can live.
Yeah.
And so one of the interesting things will be, and we're already seeing some of this, is how much of a migration do we start to see outside of the urban core areas, not only the city of Portland downtown, for example, or Seattle downtown, but in some of the surrounding more core suburban areas into further out areas. And down here in the Portland market, for example, for those of you familiar with the Portland market, you can look at like Estacada or Canby or Forest Grove and Aloha, or even down to Salem, or all these different areas, Woodburn, that we're seeing huge growth in. And I think we're going to see more because people will have more flexibility in where they're located, where they can do their job from. Regardless of how this all plays out and how many people go back into a full office environment versus not, we know this has caused some major shifts in terms of how people live, the kind of house they want, what kind of space they want to have in their house and around their house, and then just where they're going to live. And so I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of years. But we've got a lot of builders that are building heavily in some of our outlying, more rural, if you will, suburban jurisdictions. And I see that continuing to increase.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the consensus in the real estate space as well, just with flexibility of whether it's a mixed schedule of in-office versus remote or fully remote. I know second home market exploded last year. So it's a good point, Dave. Thanks for bringing that up. Ryan, anything you want to elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a great example of kind of how this stuff all comes together down in Yamhill, and we have McMinnville, where there's that urban growth boundary we talk about, and an expansion that was started over 10 years ago. It's been in the court system that long, and that kind of is a testament to the problem that we are in. We have a land supply issue by choice, and we have chosen to support policy that has created this as voters, as well as the constituency and those who we put into office, as well as some of the desires we have. And this is not to judge those desires. It's just a recognition that we have chosen to create the land supply issue that we sit in. However, luckily for McMinnville, that process is cleared up now. It's through the court system, and they have a couple hundred acres of developable land that's been pulled into the UGB, the urban growth boundary. That's going to provide opportunity. And so, that's what we do, or I am privileged enough to do, is work with these communities to talk about what that looks like on behalf of the industry. And then obviously our builders, a lot of times production builders, because they come in and work on a planned development, which would be something you would consider, the common person would think like of a subdivision or something like that, but to work with those communities. And there's a strong movement bolstered by HB 2001 on middle housing and some other desires of our communities to build mixed use communities. We always talk about it and hear about it, but our builders are doing it, where you're going to have duplexes, triplexes, multifamily, such as apartments, condos, luxury homes, surrounded by retail and park spaces. There's a strong desire for that. We are seeing some of those successes, and I can see that continuing, especially in some of these rural areas where you're able to plan. It's a partnership between these jurisdictions and builders to create these communities that we think of. It's funny. When I sit in these conversations, we're talking about communities being built or neighborhoods that were commonplace 100 years ago, 80 years ago, 60 years ago, that people enjoy. And those are some of the areas that have been around for a long time that are very desirable now in urban cores or around the urban core. Well, we're having to recreate them. And to some extent, that is pulling back or changing the laws that we've participated or lived by for over 40 or 50 years. And so I'm hopeful and optimistic, and especially seeing some of the projects that are going on out there. But it's a recognition we are all responsible for the situation we're in, and we need to help work together to get out of it.
Yeah, good point. Well, we're just over 30 minutes, and I promised to only impose 30 minutes of your time today. And I know everybody on this is time is valuable. So one final question. So I think it's fair to say that there's certainly some headwinds relative to land, labor, supplies, but there's a strong still confidence and demand from the builder community to continue to build homes and provide housing. So what would your summary of 2022 be for the new construction sector and things that realtors can expect from the new construction sector in real estate?
Ryan, you want to take that?
Sure. I will tell you, kind of leading back to a point I made earlier, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity, especially in this middle housing. In those outlying areas, there's two things I think, like Dave pointed out, the suburban areas. For us in Portland, I think it would be like, Yamhill County, Clackamas County, areas of Washington County. I think, it's already happened in the Seattle area, but the Snoqualmie, going down into Pierce County, down Tacoma area, you're going to see there's an opportunity there. And that's somewhat more traditional type of housing, single family housing. But here in Oregon specifically, with HB 2001 and its companion bill SB 458, which allows for an expedited process to create land divisions, which is very time consuming and can be costly, it's going to give opportunities for some of those undeveloped lots in more urban areas to be developed and multiple units on those lots. In addition, I really believe you're going to have property owners or homeowners looking to take advantage of that too. So properties you currently look at and don't think there's ever any viability there for more units on it or for redevelopment are going to start popping once we see these bills coming to fruition. But it's going to be a while. We're just at the beginning of this phase. We are the first in the nation here in Oregon to pass this type of legislation, and it's groundbreaking. And I think it's going to provide a big opportunity over the next year, and we're going to start to see that come to fruition starting about June.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Dave?
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'd add is, I do believe the market will stay fairly strong this year. Again, the challenge will be, as long as housing prices are escalating, these rising costs of material and labor, the builders can absorb. But once that stops, or once that slows down, that's going to be where the rubber hits the road. And when is that going to happen? I don't think that'll happen this year. Right. But at some point, we've talked about that, right? Cost of living keeps going up, housing prices are going up, people's purchasing power goes down, interest rates are rising. When will that start to slow down so that the price appreciation isn't happening at a pace that allows the builders to absorb these higher costs? Because right now, that's the thing that's kind of fueling all and allowing things to keep going so fast, is because the prices are appreciating and keeping up with the prices of materials and labor. So that'll be interesting to see what happens. I see that happening more in 23. Hopefully by then, some of these material and labor costs will come down to offset, rising interest rates, and we're dealing with some of these other issues. But I anticipate still a strong 22 for sure.
Yeah. Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today. I've said many, many times that data and information is our most valuable currency, and you've given us a lot of data and information today, and look forward to our team sharing that with their customers and consumer base, and wishing the two of you a great rest of 2022. And for all the viewers, have a great day, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next month. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks all.
Guys.